Thank you for the introductions, Louisa. A very good afternoon to everyone. Technology-based CDR credits have garnered strong interest over the past few years, and 2023 was a breakout year for the relatively nascent but fast-growing sector. We saw close to 5 million tons of CDR credits being transacted last year, which represents a 7 times increase as compared to the previous year. And we expect the demand for such credits to continue rising over time. With new methodologies coming online and more credit buyers and project developers entering the market, I think it is extremely important for us ecosystem players to better understand the pricing and quality dynamics of such credits. I think with that as a backdrop, let's turn our attention to Jen first. Jen, having interacted with both corporate buyers and project developers at CIX, we would be keen to hear from you on perspectives from both sides. How are buyers defining quality of removal credits today? What are these quality factors? And what are project developers doing to satisfy these quality standards?
Thanks so much, and thanks for allowing me to be here. I would say, starting off, the fact that we're talking about the removals part of the market and the quality discussion already makes it a bit more of an easier conversation. I would say most corporate buyers, they really do struggle with a lot more of the avoidance credits that have come under pressure in recent years. So when looking at removals already, they feel like they're in a safer zone to begin with. But even within there are definitely questions, and actually it's a question of trade-offs between quality and price to some extent, because they're looking at prices that are 10x, 100x more than they'd be looking at in the other part of the markets. And so a lot of those conversations then come down specifically to, are we looking at a nature removal or a technology removal? And within there, I think the risk factors are very specific. So obviously, a lot of times they start with what methodologies are being used and which standards are being used by these projects. And that's a lot of where safety begins. You hope that the standards themselves have set themselves up in a way that's defensible, and therefore the methodologies and projects that are generated basically come through. But I would say when you think about the specific tenets of quality, a lot of the same principles apply across the market. The same questions around permanence, additionality are being asked. But increasingly, and I think this has not really played out so as much in technology removals as it has in other sectors, social safeguards, environmental safeguards, these sorts of questions are being asked beyond just the pure carbon quality discussion. Yeah.
Thanks, Jen, for breaking down the concept of quality for us. As an intermediary between buyers and sellers, what is CIX doing to ensure that removal credits listed on your platform offer certain quality standards?
This is a perfect time to ask that question, and I know you didn't engineer it, but we just actually put out a 30-page, I apologize, it's 30 pages, view on quality that basically CIX has put out, because we've received so many of those questions around just how to think about quality, and it basically boils down to 4 things for us. We've called the first one carbon technical, which is really around additionality, permanence, and the core elements of measuring that carbon component, environmental safeguards, social safeguards, and risk management. And in the case of technology removals, we're actually, I would say, growing the coverage. To Henrietta's point from the earlier panel, because biochar is the vast majority of the market, that's actually where we started. And so the questions around that really help clients to think through, is it the pyrolysis method, the end-use application? What do you need to know about biochar specifically that helps you think about quality in that space? And so those 4 tenets we apply to various different parts of the market, but we think it's consistent even in the CDR part of the market as well.
Thanks, Jen, for sharing CIX's processes and initiatives, and great job on publishing the paper. I think following Jen's explanation, I think it's quite clear that standard bodies and registries have a huge role to play in setting quality standards and establishing credibility in the market. We understand that Puro.earth have put in place several quality criteria, such as the requirement of a 100-year minimum durability of stored carbon for its removal certificates, or COCs in short. What other initiatives has Puro.earth put in place to ensure the robustness of its methodology? Antti, we'll be keen to hear from you on this.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation and contribution to this possibility to contribute to this discussion. So, I guess our sort of leading principles have been around picking the methodologies where the risk of reversal is very small, and therefore the starting point, like Jen just pointed out, is actually a lot better than in some other types of processes. So if we can sort of understand what are the system boundaries within which we need to look into the emissions associated with that process, and we can quantify the number of molecules taken away from the circulation, and we can net those two things with each other, I think we are in a pretty good starting point. And this does indeed this is true for the methodologies that we have set up thus far. Of course, also another thing is that it needs to be practitionable or sort of practical. It has to be something that is available with current technologies and something that we can at least start working on. So with these, we have established the first sort of library of 5 methodologies, and indeed, so along the way, we have also just added a criteria that the minimum permanence is 100 years, because we believe that that is good enough to get us way beyond the peak of human emissions and sort of get down to the sort of decreasing CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, hopefully at least. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of new types of governance that is being requested and required from standards and organizations like us. I think this social and sort of environmental safeguards, as well as human rights, and all of those things need to be incorporated in, not only in terms of just do no harm, but actual sort of looking into what does it mean in practice, and auditing and verifying all those claims made by suppliers. So actually this task that we, as a registry and a standard and the one that runs the certification framework is getting more complex, and but I guess that's exactly what is required for because if we do the legwork, then the buyer doesn't have to. If all of this is then endorsed by entity like ICVCM and their CCP criteria, that stamp will make it easier for the buyers to transact and interact, and that's exactly what this market needs. Simplicity, ability for different kinds of intermediaries serve their client base, and enable different kinds of portfolios to be sort of created with some sort of equal quality criteria.
Thanks, Antti, for shedding light on what Puro.earth is doing in terms of defining quality standards for market participants. I guess moving on to Thomas, we understand that McKinsey has worked with multiple clients who are buyers of carbon removal credits, as well as project developers. I have 2 questions for you today. Firstly, what are some of the quality metrics which your clients look out for when purchasing credits? Secondly, how do your clients assess risks when pre-purchasing credits from projects which are not operational yet? What are some of the safeguards that they put in place?
Thanks, Brian, and thank you very much for having me. It's great to see such interest in carbon removals in the first place. I think what we always keep on saying is that the net in net zero means carbon removals. So we have to scale it despite the 5 million tons that were transacted. That's very far off a gigaton, and it's very far off the 6 to 12 gigatons that we'll likely need on this. So in our work, building on the point that both Jen and Antti already made, we first take it sort of like one level higher. What do you use the carbon credits for in your corporate strategy? And there's multiple ways of slicing this in the first place, right? There's your license to operate, there's something about your residual emissions in the end, about dealing with your supply chain, but also for some clients, quite frankly, to invest in it because they recognize the hypothesis of that we need more removals in the future, and they're pretty dear at the moment. And then we take it one level down from there. Depending on this use, what type of credits do you want to buy? And it's not only removal credits, obviously, but durable technical removal credits are a big part of it, and they have benefits, drawbacks, and risks associated with it. So I think when it comes to the benefits, and as you will probably see also in the CCP release and in various other parts, they are representing to some extent the highest quality in terms of durability, additionality, and measurability of the credits. And so going through this for many of the tech-based CDR is rather straightforward, because if you extract it from the air, there was nothing before. If you render it inert, well, you know how long it is inert, essentially. And if you inject it into a reservoir, for example, you also have a reasonable degree of confidence on how long it stays in there and what potential leakage rates are. So it has plenty of benefits on how to assess the quality there in the first place, and rather self-explanatory. It gets more complicated when you start adding in a nature component into this, as you know from nature-based solutions in the first place, so that also transfers back into removals overall. But they also have drawbacks. And so the big quality, well, anyway, the way that we assess them and clients assess them, it's just the availability and the cost. They are significantly more expensive than an afforestation or reforestation credit, for example. Yes, you get greater certainty, but at greater cost. You have a great variability in the cost, because many of them are forward purchases with very unclear cost curves. So we have projections. These projections keep on changing. So how much money do you want to contribute today versus how much do you want to wait and see where the market is? And when you buy them on a forward basis, you take on the technology risk. Which technology did you select? So which type of technical removal? Within the technical removal, which type of technology do we have? We just already had the biochar example, but the same applies to anything that is carbon capture, whether it's solvent-based or anything else. And then you take on the operational risk to a large extent as well. Many of these are forward purchases, so pre-financing a facility that is doing this. And last but not least, you take on the credit risk. Many of the purchases are for smaller companies to deliver in 7, 10, 15 years. So it's not an easy market to do right now. And this is exactly where solutions providers come in. So you have insurance companies that are offering products against insurance products for non-delivery or against non-delivery. You can work by yourself about what is the portfolio that you want to do. If you look at, for just one example that is publicly available, is how Microsoft has built a portfolio out and how they have selected suppliers. You can apply all of the frameworks that we have done. You have to do the diligence on the actual company itself, and you have to calibrate which technology readiness level do you feel comfortable with. There's not an easy answer, obviously, but it helps to shape your portfolio. And I think this is where we see right now a lot of innovation as well in terms of how do we deliver many of these CapEx-intensive projects, and how do we de-risk that delivery. And insurance is just one of the aspects of it.
Thank you so much, Thomas, for the in-depth sharing. I think maybe coming back to Antti, the gravitation towards high-quality credits is likely to be a persistent trend. I think the audience and I are curious to find out more from you on how Puro.earth intend to stay ahead of the game, given that MRV is a crucial element when it comes to defining quality of CDR credits. What are some of the MRV challenges, for the various removal pathways that you see, and how can they be resolved? I think a follow-on question I have would be, what new solutions or digital tools is Puro.earth exploring?
Well, as it happens, actually, last weekend we completed our switchover of our registry to a new sort of technology that is based on blockchain. So that's one of the sort of solutions that we are deploying. It's sort of inside our platform, so it's not very visible. But anyway, that's some of the core technologies, and of course that. Piece of technology came from NASDAQ Market Tech. Anyway, so multiple different development paths going forward. I think, of course, other aspect of the digital development is sort of people talk about digital MRV, which can mean very different kinds of things for different people. But one aspect of that is that if we can sort of get data directly from the process, from different kinds of sensors and indicators, we can we can make it easier for the auditor to make sure that the data corresponds to the claims, and also, of course, we can move towards sort of a continuous issuance, which then leads time into money, and therefore increases the efficiency and perhaps lowers the price because the cost of capital is decreasing. So just some of those aspects. Then on the other side, we are no longer a startup. We are adolescent, perhaps, if not grown up as an organization, which means that we've actually we've had our general rules that dictate how we operate since day one in 2019. But now sort of we are adding layers to make sure that we actually obey our own rules, and sort of our sort of internal compliance is being sort of enhanced, and make sure that in the increasingly complex environment we keep up with our requirements.
Thanks, Antti. I think that's a very, very interesting point. I think digitalization doesn't come cheap, or it doesn't come free. So I think the next question I have is the associated compliance cost that comes with more usage of MRV as well as digitalization. So I think the next question I have is for Thomas. So I think while we expect costs of removal to fall over time, with technology advancement and growing capacities to be put in place over time, we are also expecting higher compliance costs, to meet quality standards. And I think some of the compliance costs would arise from the likes of, blockchain and digitalization. So how big would such a compliance cost be, and how would such compliance costs impact the longer-term pricing of technology-based carbon removal credits?
Yeah, thanks. And this is a developing area. Pretty much. I think there's two big parts to it. There's one, the technology, how to measure the carbon, how to verify it, and how to trace it over time. And then the second part is also the regulatory burden, the methodology design, quite frankly. So let me start with the second one. It remains important to design and select the right methodology for removals. We have various different administrative burdens in what needs to be proven. We have various different timeframes when recertification needs to happen, for example, etc. So, I mean, there's some standards. If you have to recertify your biochar project every 7 years or so, well, it's inert. It has happened. What do I need to recertify at that point? So picking the right methodology obviously reduces that burden. And obviously the standards are recognizing this and working on this. It's just for the ecosystem to takes time. It's more sort of like in the beginning, picking the wrong one just means a lot of people time is taken up in doing this. So that becomes a bit of an impediment, but it is getting solved over time. It's just more an issue in the 2020s. Now when it comes to technology, it's to some extent following a bit of like a golden ratio. It's getting a bit more expensive at the moment while we're working out how to measure it and how to track it. But as you probably look around, there's already so many startups on doing better overall monitoring, getting better soil samples, traceability, etc. So the ecosystem is thriving in this aspect. You have many solutions providers. So the cost right now, actually not that high in comparison to the cost of creating the credit and the cost of the project. They will go up a bit. And that is natural given that the sector is growing, the demand for these services are growing, these companies are maturing, turning into adolescents, and they need to be profitable at some point as well. But then once you start seeing the consolidation in the sector, as we've seen in many, many other technologies, that's when economies of scale come in, join a larger organization and leverage their infrastructure, what have you, essentially. That brings it down again. And sort of like with respect to the overall cost of tech-based removals, MRV right now is not an impediment, the cost of MRV. The credibility yes, people still argue about things, rightly or wrongly, they still argue about this, but the cost is not necessarily the impediment. Antti, please. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, just wanted to say that there's actually, so it is true that in some cases the MRV cost is increasing, but there's also another trend. For example, within enhanced rock weathering, there's at the moment we are in a phase where we as a standard don't have the absolute understanding of the high enough sort of requirement. So therefore, we put it, very high. And the intention is that while sort of we and the sort of the scientific community learns more, we can find and adjust
exactly.
the requirement to a level where it is sufficient and provides the right answer at a reasonable cost.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to get working, get the data in, be able to very accurately understand those processes, and then we can adjust.
Yeah, it's a maturing space. Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas and Antti. I think we spoke quite a fair bit about quality standards as well as costs associated with adhering such standards. I think it's timely for us to talk about pricing as well. So I think, Antti, we spoke about having a minimum 100-year durability threshold, but we understand that within the various CDR pathways, I think durability ranges from 100 years to 1,000 to over 1,000 years. So do buyers differentiate them, and do they assign a higher price premium for CDR credits with longer durability? I think it's a question to all panelists. Maybe we can start with Jen.
I think largely I would say that's within the realms of really, really technical academic discussions. The typical buyer, I would say, does not have that level of sophistication, even though I would say that some of those questions go beyond 1,000 to 10,000 years. But many buyers do ask the practicality of, many of these projects, they are governed within nations that frankly have people running these systems. And therefore, how do we know that they'll outlast this 100,000, 10,000 year promise? Right? And so at the moment, I do think that there is that shade of gray around something that's a high durability, more than 1,000 year, but it's not showing up in a notable price differential that is attributed to that specifically, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Maybe over to Antti.
Well, we witnessed a sort of a positive correlation between the price and the permanence. But it may be incidental. There are not that many, different timescale sort of methodologies in operation nowadays, and we know that there will be sort of downward sort of price curves as the scale of operations increases, and that depends very much on the methodology and the process itself, and sort of the cost of energy, for example, and many factors contribute to that. But yeah, at least initially there seems to be a correlation.
Do you see the same thing for project developers as well? So for example, if the EAC project claims to have durability of over 1,000 years, do you see project developers wanting to charge that premium?
I guess direct air capture is a resource-intensive, project type or process type, and therefore they need to have a fairly high price, and it is, of course, backed by the high durability.
Got it. Maybe over to Thomas.
Yeah. So I agree with Jen that we're not necessarily seeing that there's a big differentiation in the market on this afterwards. And I think the big challenge right now is that we just don't have sufficient volume to be able to price it well. And we don't have clarity on the use of removal credits to say we actually have now a competitive market in this one. Then we would see how a comparatively lower cost biochar project would be priced vis-a-vis a direct air capture project, priced vis-a-vis an ocean alkalinity enhancement project. Right now, what we observe is a lot of quote-unquote cost-plus pricing. Because we know we need to build the facility, we need to carry out the project, we know it's risky, we know that, so there's a risk premium in there, and we know it will take many, many years. So we need to also have some cost recovery in the future. And so right now it's a lot of forward agreements, it's a lot of locking in the demand in the first place, and then back delivering it. And that's where we see the price differential, where biochar is just structurally cheaper than direct air capture. I'm just using them as an example, but you can stack up the various technologies. We are really far away from removals markets to resemble what we have seen very much on the avoidance and reduction credits markets, because there it's much more of a competition. You know that there's a forestry project that is competing with a cook stove that is competing with something else. And yes, they have different attributes, but technically they're supposed to represent 1 ton of CO2, either reduced or avoided. And there the pricing has been a bit more sort of like trying to price in the co-benefits. So does it benefit communities? Does it do anything on nature or biodiversity benefits, etc.? That's where we saw a bit of like price differentiation there. On tech-based removals, the co-benefits are not really there many times. We speak about safeguards for them essentially, like when it comes to water use, land use, and other parts, but it's not, a direct air capture plant doesn't create more biodiversity, whereas not deforesting preserves it, or re-afforesting potentially creates it. So that sort of moment doesn't really exist there. So long term, you would expect that price converges a lot more, and you would have a more uniform removal price. But it's anyone's guess on, it is significantly higher than what we have today. It's significantly higher than what the social cost of carbon is, most likely. But we need it. So it also remains to be seen of like, what is the right way of thinking about the cost of removals, or the price of removals.
If I may just comment briefly on that, I think in the sort of longer run, let's say 10 years from today, I would very much hope to see that CDRs or carbon removal credits are more commoditized than they are nowadays, and the more attributes there are, the more differentiation there is between these credits, the more or the less fungible they are. So therefore, I would sort of like to see that we are growing up in this sense as well, that we are sort of figuring out what is the sort of minimum common criteria that needs to be met by these credits, and of course that way we can apply all the same mechanisms and sort of tools that have been developed for other commodities. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Of course, with the advent of machine learning and AI being deployed in pricing, probably that can help us understand more complex sort of products that contain different kinds of attributes, and people can assign different values for these attributes, but it becomes a little difficult for people to understand if there are too many of those.
Thanks, Antti. I believe now is a good time to segue into our audience Q&A. Please scan the QR code on the screen to share your questions if you have yet to done so. I think we have a question. We have a first question that came in. I think it's quite an interesting one. So I think the question goes, given the higher cost of tech-based CDR credits, why don't we just focus on the avoidance and emission reduction before buying credits, tech-based credits post-2030?
I'm happy to take a stab at this. Relates back to the previous poll, right? We kind of need all of the above. I think it's still unclear. I mean, the guidance is still not there yet. What can I use which credit for? I think the science is there that we do need removals. Whatever scenario there is, we need removals. I think where we currently heading, if you follow the IPCC and others, is we need even more removals and potentially even earlier. So that's one of the big reasons you need it. The second one is if you don't invest into it today, when do you bring the cost of it down? And how do you incentivize all of the innovation, the RD&D basically, the research, development and deployment into this sector. So you need both of it. This doesn't mean that it has to crowd out all of the avoidance and reduction credits. They have their own place. And again, like preserving a forest, for example, is a very worthwhile effort, even when the certainty interval around the carbon that is preserved is very different. And if you need larger buffer pools to guard against natural disasters, etc., we sort of have worked large parts of this already out. So there's not necessarily an either or. It's really a both, as science would basically tell you.
And I would argue that this is not a zero-sum game. There's an absolute necessity to reduce emissions, in your own operations, and definitely help others reduce emissions as well. But it seems to me, at least, that there is different pockets of money, different or pools of money that is interested in supporting the research and development and deployment of new kinds of processes and technologies and so forth. So if we are just saying that, no, don't do that, it doesn't necessarily mean that the money that is sort of left away from the carbon removal activities is suddenly going into the emission reduction activities. So it should not be thought of as a zero-sum game.
And maybe just chime in to suggest that we also break the stereotype that avoidance credits are cheap always, or cheaper, because there are some really expensive avoidance credits, especially when you're talking about alternative fuels, and those actually can be as expensive as CDR credits, and in fact really struggle from being labeled as avoidance and still costing hundreds of dollars per ton. And those also still need to be supported, because then they bring us in that same conversation down that technology cost curve.
Thank you so much. Fully agree on the need to have CDR credits complementing avoidance type credits in the market going forward. The second question we have, I think it's specific to Antti from Puro. So the question is around why 100 years is the appropriate duration cutoff? Why not something shorter than that?
Well, I guess originally we thought that it is close enough to the residence times of time of CO2 in the atmosphere, but that's probably less important, because it is true that every single ton of CO2 that is put into the atmosphere needs to be taken away from there, because even though it is absorbed into the biosphere, or if it is absorbed by the ocean, ocean is just a buffer. It becomes more acid. It suffers from all the CO2 that it absorbs. So that is not an excuse. That is not the way to sort of explain to ourselves that it's okay to continue to do that, or to have shorter duration credits to offset some of the emissions that are caused by our actions. So therefore, 100 years is a figure that will take us, into the next century, and by that time we should be sort of well into sort of fusion energy, and we should, be able to deploy, or live our lives in this planet Earth in a very different way than we do at the moment. It's taking us far away, sufficiently far away. Of course, you could argue that it doesn't have to be 100 years. That's just our take. That's our decision to set it up there. I think the ICVCM continuous improvement working group for permanence is talking about this topic, and there are different time scales are being discussed, and 100 years is definitely not the only one over there. So remains to be seen where it will be. But then another question is, well, if it is a shorter duration, does that mean that those are now temporary credits, and do you need to then repurchase the credit at the time when it expires? Remains to be seen.
Exactly, remains to be seen. Thanks, Antti. I think we spoke about commoditization of tech-based CDR credits in our earlier discussion. So I think there is a question on it around the feasibility of that and when do you expect that to happen? So I think the question to the panelists is how far ahead do you think such a commoditization of tech-based credits will happen? Is it something that will happen in the next 5 years, or is it something that is going to happen beyond 10 years?
I can start on that. I think when it comes to commoditization, I think there is a demand driver set as well as a supply driver set. So on the supply driver set, I mean, a lot of us will think about how comparable are the goods basically within the category. And obviously CDR allows itself or lends itself a little bit more into that uniformity, more so than, for example, some of the nature credits and some of the other pieces, especially as we delve into things like co-benefits, which are a bigger part of that conversation, right? But I do think a large part of the potential for commoditization also comes from the demand drivers. If the buyers are buying for very, very different reasons, that makes commoditization much more difficult. And so I would assume, you know, if we were to take kind of the broader markets trend around commoditization as kind of the precedent, it's been actually quite a journey on that front, and largely because both the demand side drivers and the supply side drivers haven't quite come together. One, they're not very comparable, and two, people are buying for very different reasons. And so the willingness to all say there's one style to buy, and i.e. commoditization and allowing for a standardized trade, that's been quite hard. But that said, I think CDR does have some of these advantages on both the side of the supply as well as on demand.
Yeah.
Thanks.
What about time frame? Do you have in mind the time frame for such a commoditization to happen?
I personally don't have a time frame in mind because I think it's one of those wonderful problems that are technically not that challenging, but we as society need to agree on it. Yeah. So it's about consensus forming. And consensus forming can happen rather rapidly, can be catalyzed by any of the impacts that we see where we recognize maybe we should move a bit faster. But it can also take a very, very long time. I mean, consider all of the climate negotiations. We're heading up to almost 30 years, and we slowly are edging ourselves towards various different levels of consensus. So unfortunately, it's anyone's guess on how long it takes. I do hope it happens sooner rather than later, because a ton removed should be a ton removed, and we don't have to technically solve how do we measure biodiversity and compare it and all of the other co-benefits that anything nature has with it, but it should be much more straightforward essentially, but it's unfortunately a consensus problem.
Rather than a strict timeline, I think you could be looking at triggers or milestones. And so if I relate that back to the demand and supply drivers, someone had talked earlier on in the previous panel about the policy in the EU accepting some of these sorts of credits. That clearly could be a milestone around triggering a demand signal for these style of credits as a whole, as a basket, could commoditize to fit a specific demand use. And that could allow for one particular type of commoditization, for example. But back to Thomas's point, consensus building around that policy, how long will that take? Yeah.
Thanks for the insights. I think maybe just one last question. I think, Thomas, we spoke about the need to scale CDR, and we are far from it to reach the gigaton scale that we expect by 2050. So how do we unlock more capital into the CDR market, and how do we overcome demand and supply uncertainties?
Yeah. Well, happy to start with this, but look, I mean, we've already seen many of the advanced market commitments. That is a great thing to have for something that just right now makes it very uncertain to be able to build a facility and then you don't know who you can sell it to. So while we are waiting for our societal consensus on what credits to use for what, that is great. Whether this is Frontier, whether this is Next Gen, whether this is any of those coalitions. To some extent, we don't necessarily need more coalitions. We just need them, the current ones, more capitalized, essentially. The other part is we have certain corporates just stepping forward outside of the coalitions as well, and just saying, regardless of what the consensus is, this is my new climate plan on what I want to do. Some of them get criticized for it, regardless of what they do. Some of them get praised for it. So it's a very courageous stance to take, to just say, Like some have said, I just neutralize all of my emissions from now on. Now, you can do this when your emissions are a very small part of your revenue base. I would think it's very, very difficult to do this for like a cement company, for example. So it's a bit more on, to be honest, like to some extent, corporate philanthropy, if you want to, for lack of a better term, to say, to bring down the cost of the technologies itself. And I think it's very sensible what we see right now, a basket of technologies, etc. It's not that we just favor one part of it. But that's one of the big ones. It's just more certain type of capital, to Antti's point, that is needed for this, that otherwise would either go unspent or not raised.
Well, I guess the elephant in the room is SBTi, and I saw that there was a question about their guidance, the board of trustees, that sort of alluded that you can use offsets for scope 3 emissions. I think that statement didn't really have the positive impact that they probably wanted it to have. Quite the contrary, actually. That turmoil that it caused was probably not in anybody's interest. But if we have a solid understanding of what types of credits could be used and what are the intermediate sort of milestones for corporations to start building the capacity for carbon removal, that would be the key to unlock much more capital, because that would make increase the clarity in terms of what needs to be achieved by when in order to achieve net zero, even though this is not a secret. This has the whole sort of concept of this dynamic portfolio building has been academically described in multiple instances. The now updated, some time ago updated Oxford offsetting principles, lays it all out. It's all over there. Somebody would need to act according to that. Yeah. And then, everything starts to unlock, subsequently.
I think, frankly, people are looking for some voice, or the voice, if there is one in the room, that allows basically peace of mind to take action. And that's why I think the reaction to the initial announcement from SBTi garnered the reaction it did, because it is seen as currently one of the loudest voices around.
I think wrapping up today's conversation, I think there are three key takeaways that I would like to highlight. So I think firstly, high quality tech-based CDR credits have a huge role to play in meeting corporates' net zero targets and close the investment gap by attracting private capital to fund carbon removal projects. I think secondly, the meeting of minds between credit buyers and project developers on definition of quality attributes is key. And I think the last point we spoke about quite a bit on digitalization. So MRV and other technologies that are emerging will continue to be crucial elements to enhance transparency and integrity of tech-based CDR credits. So I think with that, Jen, Antti, Thomas, on behalf of the audience, thank you so much for your candid sharing and your insights today. Thank you.